The Buzz with Jess Lujan.
Sabina Perez and Kelly Marsh Titan are my guests this evening, of course, about the Protehi Litegjan organization. So prior to going on break, we're talking, of course, about mitigation. And you don't quite buy mitigation. I don't quite buy that as well. They're very big in buffer zones. But I'm going, man, if I have, if a fire range is going to be next to my house and you have a buffer zone, are you going to tell me that I won't be able to hear it, or would it not make my land value go down? Who else will want to be, I'm going, wait a minute. And I think I'm of sound mind, I mean, imagine birds and insects and trees and all that. I mean, and fruit bats, okay, that we've almost hunted out of existence at this point. Imagine, I mean, there's absolutely no way. I don't, I'm not, a biologist or by no means, but I'm just saying, how can a buffer zone save?
the noise pollution that's generated. They said that there will be an increase in the decibels. And so, I mean, they do acknowledge that there's going to be more of that, and it's going to be able to be heard throughout, and it's more than just Litegjan. It's going to be able to be heard throughout Arunao, Litegjan, Pahun, Inapsan, and these are all, I mean, a combination. They're ancestral villages, so there's a lot of integrity to those sites. There's a lot of sensitivity to those sites, because you know how it is when we go and visit a Ladi village. You need to be respectful, you need to be quiet, you're not going to be making a lot of loud noise, but yet this noise is going to be invading those areas. But then they also are lands that have been owned for generations and generations of family here. And so those families, they have beach resorts there, they utilize that area, they're caretaking it, they're safeguarding it, and yet they are going to be having to contend with 273 days out of the year, some weekdays, some weeknights, and some weekends. They're going to be having to listen to maybe as many as 18,000 bullets, and now possibly some hand grenades, disrupting all of that, the cultural significance, the cultural etiquette, like the Chamorro etiquette of being respectful and quiet in those sites, but then also using it as a resort, or just enjoying family time at the beach to get away from the hubbub and all of that.
And we talk about the decibels, you're talking about decibels here, and again, a lot of these species here are more sensitive to the sound, to the decibels than we humans.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so the Venihi are going to be impacted. They know that with noise disturbance, they cannot roost properly, they cannot forage properly, so that would affect the reproduction. And so that's the thing about with this mitigation is that they can make, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has made the determination that this type of project, there's something called incidental take. So that an individual of that species can be killed if it's not done intentionally, but as long as it doesn't jeopardize the whole species. And so for us on Guam, we don't, we know Venihi exists outside of Guam, but we don't get to experience it. In other, it's hard for us to go up to, Rota or other places to get that experience. And really the best experience is in the wild, communing with nature. And the other thing with the mitigation is that, so with the Cerianthus nelsonii, 100-foot perimeter barrier, to me, is not a sufficient way to protect the species, especially if you're going to destroy the forest around it, the forest which protects it. And it's going to be more susceptible to fires, to drying out. So the health of that one tree, which is the only reproductive tree on Guam, is going to be severely impacted. There has yet to be any outplanting thus far, because that's one of the mitigations, that they were supposed to have a minimum of so many outplantings of the seedlings of that tree. None of that is reproductive. And so the damage to that mother tree, if none of these trees survive, let's say we have a typhoon the next day and all of them are wiped out, that I think will really put the species in jeopardy.
Now, going back to, again, our culture and, of course, again, these lands and the respect. I mean, obviously there's an ancient village up there. I mean, there is an ancient village.
Both up at Northwest Field, we have evidence that They had they carried pottery up there. There, I believe, were slingstones and so forth. So we know that they probably hunted and did all kinds of activities up there and considered that part of the village. Really.
And I know, again, when you have archaeologists and of course the culture, you know, and a lot of times they mesh. But there are times too when they don't mesh, when they say, hey, let's dig, and it's fine. And then, but the culture says, hey, respect what is there, leave it alone, don't touch it, don't touch it. I think that's where you're at, right? Basically, in that.
Yes, and that's nothing new. In the 1970s, the State Historic Preservation Office knew that that area up there was very valuable. They did not do any digging of any sort. They wanted to wait till the technology caught up so they can basically understand what's underneath without having to disturb the site. So that was actually understood long before. And we're trying to, you know, basically reinforce that concept that that area is very valuable to us. It has one of the oldest archaeological findings of the Chamorro people in the whole of the Marianas Archipelago. This is our heritage. This is our birthplace, one can say. And to put such a damaging and that's going to cause damage throughout the years, that's an affront to our people and our heritage.
Right, and again, in their own documents, in the supplemental EIS, I'm trying to be able to cite it. They do note they note like 3 impacts. So one is going to be some direct impact. They have actually already bulldozed Laddie there back in the 70s and 80s, so they already caused some direct impact. But there's going to be more direct impact down at the Laddie Village area where they are going to do more bulldozing. They acknowledge that there's going to be indirect impact because they do understand that the noise, the possible stray bullet, and some of the other impacts, the changes to the sites and so forth, the sitescape, if you will, and things like that, they do acknowledge that that's going to challenge the cultural integrity of that. And then they also do acknowledge that taking away access, it challenges the integrity, but it also is likely to cause feelings of social injustice because this is something, I mean, when we're talking about that net negative, this is something that they are taking away from us for generations. First of all, they're causing some unknown level of damage because they didn't fully survey it, which is a questionable act that they would go ahead and cause this damage to an area they haven't even fully surveyed to understand what all the damages are. But that they're taking away this access, and that's, like I said, going to be for generations. That access is going to be taken away.
Now let me ask this, because I know that you're trying to get an audience not just with the governor but also the military leaders. Okay, we can talk about that. I think we're going to have to extend this to another episode. But and has anybody ever attempted to answer the fact that if Paugut was an area that if they used would be desecrating the area, it'd be really the culture and you know our Guelos and Guelos, okay, there's down there. But if Letegjan is even more disruptive than that, how was there any justification? I mean, I know you haven't spoken to them, but was there anything coming out, maybe even you know, unofficial, as to if this is bad? And the Chamorro said, this is badder, this is worse than bad.
Yeah, well, you know, some statements have been made recently that I think are really problematic. I don't know how they would categorize it, but it really sounds like trying to put some spin on it, that it's good, and trying to convince us that not having access and damaging it directly and indirectly are somehow good. And really, you know, historic preservationists, I mean, I have a background in historic preservation and cultural heritage studies, and people who have even more experience than me, they said, no, that is overgeneralization, that is insensitive, and in this case, it's inaccurate to try and spin it or say it, that it's something that's good. So some of the messaging that's been coming out of there, or maybe even their understanding, my public comments were that there were several, but one of them was that when you're looking at an area that is culturally, like deeply culturally significant, as Sabina is saying, this is one of, out of the entire archipelago, it's one of just a very few that date back 3,500 years ago, if, you know, if not more. That they look at areas like that where there are pictographs, that people go there to connect with their ancestors. They conduct, by the tens of thousands over the years, there have been subsistence fishers there. They still go there. They collect amut, or traditional medicine there. They're still collecting the dokdok and the lemai, the breadfruit there. But they call it recreational, and they say they have recreational places elsewhere. And it's like, no, that does not address people's connection to that land, which for many families is generational. They learn to fish those reefs with their grandparents. Their grandparents learn to fish those reefs with their grandparents.
So basically, inaccessibility to the area is basically their protection. They're protecting us from ourselves, basically.
That might be the spin out
anyway,
there.